The mission planning for every SR began basically the day before. The mission planners would bring the route of flight, they'd bring out the maps, they'd bring your computer flight plan, and we would sit down at a table the day before, somewhere around noontime, and just sit there and mission plan all through the route. The way Dawn and I mission planned was going through the entire route of flight on the map and doing what we called a what-if drill. And you would say, what if something happens here? What if we lose an engine here? What if we see SAMs fired here? What if the MiGs come up here? What if we're low on gas here? So we go around this entire route of flight, giving it a what-if drill. That way, by doing it that way, you have a good game plan to begin with, because at Mach 3 at 2,000 miles an hour, you don't have a lot of time to make up quick, instant decisions.
Could you explain some of the missions you were involved with around the world?
Basically, the first detachment we flew out of was Det 1. That was the original detachment. And all those missions were over in the Pacific Theater. I would call our bread and butter mission was going through the Korean DMZ from the northwest to the southeast, or the southeast to the northwest. Always imaging up into North Korea, obviously. We also covered the Soviet Union's largest fleet headquarters at Vladivostok. We've been up to the Kamchatka Peninsula and imaged the Petropavlovsk, a city which the Russians had an airfield at the very southern end of the Kamchatka Peninsula at Petro, and we would image it as well. So that was basically our missions. Early on, when the crews before my time, their main mission was North Vietnam. They were flying out of Okinawa, covering Hanoi all the time, back and forth. Once Vietnam ended, those Korean theaters and up into the Kamchatka Peninsula became our mainstay. Primary locations we went out of Det 4 at RAF Mildenhall were up into the Barents Sea area, and we would image the Soviet Union's second largest naval fleet headquarters at Murmansk, and do a 180 return, imaging them back, and then come back into another refueling off of the coast of Norway. Then we could either take the airplane, if the mission called for it, we'd go into the Baltic Sea and do a counterclockwise turn, slow the airplane down to 2.8 Mach, since the Baltic Sea is such a small confines, and image all the Warsaw Pact countries off to the right-hand side. And then you could either do that mission, and then also another mission we had in the FRG of Germany. We do a clockwise turn in Germany, imaging all the Warsaw Pact countries off to the left-hand side. So basically between the Barents Sea, the Baltic, and then Germany, those were our bread and butter missions. A few times we flew the missions all the way down through the Mediterranean. I remember when Buzz Carpenter did that. It was about a 9 to 10 hour mission, all the way into when Yemen was two countries. It was North Yemen and South Yemen. The government wanted to learn some more intelligence on that country. We flew all the way down to Mildenhall. Very, very long flight for the crews flying it. We also did the post-strike of the raids on Libya. We did 3 or 4 missions on that. And that pretty much covers the missions we flew out of Mildenhall. One mission that sort of Dawn and I were flying out of Det 1, which is out of Okinawa, and we were going up to the Kamchatka Peninsula, and there were 3 MiG-25s. It was a perfect storm. This wouldn't normally happen, but there were no clouds, and I could see contrails probably 200 miles off my nose, and they were in a circular orbit, and didn't know what was there. I just saw the contrails. It wasn't until we got closer I could actually break out, and I could see 3 distinct contrails in this orbit. And then when they came out of the orbit, they started heading towards our aircraft. And I told Dawn to get ready with the jammers, and also turn his view sight on, because they're coming right underneath us. And they tried, after they came out of the circle, they went into about a 10-mile trail with each other, and they popped up to try to get us, but there was no way they were going to get there. And I felt quite comfortable. Nothing happened, and it was very ho-hum. They might have been just doing a practice run for all I know, but nothing was fired that day at us. All our missions in the United States were basically training sorties, and what we tried to do with those was to replicate as best we could the sorties that you're going to be flying overseas, the operational missions. So those were all in the western United States because there's some wide open expanses where we could do the sonic booms, because sonic booms around the United States are you got to be careful what cities you're over. We had to avoid all major cities. I think the population in excess of 30,000, we had to avoid them by so many miles. But our mission planners developed all their routes in the United States. Overseas, the mission planners developed the routes so that we were focusing on the targets and the airplane at the right point in space at the right time to get the best intelligence with the cameras on board, either on the left side or on the right side of the airplane. So that's how all our missions were planned by the mission planners, to be at the right point in space, either maybe in a bank or level, so the cameras are always looking into the bad guys at the right time, all the time. Most missions, we had a lot of planning ahead. There were a few contingencies back in the early 70s, 75, 76, 77, to come over to Mildenhall, because we weren't at Mildenhall to begin with. And depending on what NATO was doing with exercises over in Europe, we would be called over on a very short notice to go over to Mildenhall and fly specific missions during the NATO exercises. So those were the ones that were sort of ad hoc. And then eventually we became full-time at Mildenhall at Det 4. From takeoff to maximum speed, we only had one mission that actually did that I remember, and we called it the rocket ride out of Okinawa. Any other mission, you would take off and refuel. But the mission out of Okinawa, it didn't fly very often. I was very fortunate, I got to fly it one time. But you take off with a 65,000 pound fuel load, and you don't hit a tanker, you climb on out and just keep climbing, and you head up to North Korea. You make one pass through the Korean DMZ, and you come back to back to Okinawa. And the time on the computer flight plan was 57 minutes from takeoff to landing. Very, very busy and very demanding mission, but it was very neat to not have to refuel, just one swing, and that was it. The very first SR-71 operational mission was flown out of Okinawa, Japan at Det 1 in, I believe it was March of 1968. That was the very first operational mission. And we stayed at Okinawa ever since my first mission in 1968. We started picking up Mildenhall in 1975, 76 time frame, going over on short deployments for a month. The next thing, we were over there 2 months, and then we'd be over there for 3 months at a time. And pretty soon we were there, after about 3 years of doing this monthly thing, we were there for pretty much full time after about 3 years. And finally, it became a full-fledged detachment around 83, 82, 83, when Maggie Thatcher finally made an announcement that Det 4 actually existed.